We are glad to have you with us this morning as we come to our lesson today. We continue the series that we've had for the last couple of weeks about building lasting relationships. And today is a topic that is a tough topic, and that is the power of forgiveness. And because it is kind of a heavier topic, I know you probably can't read it, but I'll read it for you. Before we begin, this is our levity. I'm not coming over there to help you kill some spider. Just stop panicking. It's more afraid of you than you are of it. We're way past that now, Carl. And the spider has a gun pointed at Carl. And so we start with a little bit of levity because today's topic is a serious topic. It is the one that in the passage that Brother Tom read for communion, that he has reconciled the world to himself. And because of Jesus' work of reconciliation, of making peace between us and God, of forgiving us, and extending that forgiveness to us and to so many nations and tribes and places over the last 2,000 years, the force of forgiveness is one of those things that we all like to receive. We do not necessarily all like to give. And we're going to start with a very tough passage. And in rarity, the rendering from this comes from the Amplified Bible Classic, which is a little bit more expanded. And we find our passage is in 1 Corinthians 13, that great love passage, beginning at verse 5. But we're going to read the passage together. If you will, go on ahead and turn over there. 1 Corinthians 13. It's a fun one to read as long as you don't think about it. The apostle, dealing with a church that had issues of pride, issues of division, issues of different people feeling that they weren't being respected because of slights or wrongs, as Brother Rich brought out. We talked a little bit about that this morning in class. That he gets to the heart of an issue, and that is that it does not matter how many things God has blessed you or I with. It does not matter how many good works we have. If we are not operating in a place of love, we are all wrong about it. And so 1 Corinthians 13, the Word of God says, "Though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, but I have not love, I have become a sounding brass or a clanging cymbal. And though I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith so that I can remove mountains, but I don't have love, I am nothing. And though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, though I give my body to be burned, but have not love, it profits me nothing. Love suffers long and is kind. Love does not envy. Love does not parade itself. It is not puffed up. It does not behave unmannerly. It does not seek its own. It is not provoked. It does not think evil. It does not rejoice in iniquity, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never fails. But where there's prophecies, they will fail. Where there's tongues, they will cease. Where there's knowledge, it will be vanished away. For we know in part and we prophesy in part, but when that which is perfect is come, then that which is in part will be done away. When I was a child, I spoke as a child, I understood as a child, I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then I shall know just as I also am known. And now by faith, hope, and love, and in these three, and the greatest of these is love." And we come to what is the second most important relationship that you will ever have. Now, if you are here this morning and you are not married presently, you say, well, then this sermon doesn't apply to me. Oh, no, it does. Because the principles that we're going to look at, yeah, there we go. All right. That's the one we want to be on. Thank you. Whether it's in marriage, with other family, with our church family, the principle of love's application is going to apply. But one of the places that it is so difficult at times is in marriage. Now, Catherine did give me permission. She took me aside after Bible class. She gave me a loving talking to, and she said that I was not kind enough to myself at 99.999% wrong. She said I'm at least 50-50. Half the time I'm right and half the time I'm not. So I appreciate the upgrade. I appreciate the upgrade. I still think she's being a little too gracious, but I'm not going to argue because, you know, it says that I'm not supposed to push for my 99.999. And even though we address some of this with levity, why I put the Amplified translation up here, it's the Amplified Classic. Love, God's love in us, does not insist on its own rights or its own way. It's not self-seeking. The first thing that we find there as we look at the application is that it is not about getting its own way. One of the great things about being American is that our founders understood that there were certain inalienable rights given to a creature by its creator, among which were life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And then the founders went on after they had agreed on a functioning constitution, and they made 10 amendments to it right out of the gate that we call the Bill of Rights. And one of the challenges that we have as Christians is taking the fact that we think we have rights about everything as Americans and realizing that Jesus says to us, the only right that we have is the right to live and walk and be in love. And one of the things that love does not insist on is love doesn't say, it's my right. And this is a tough pill to swallow. Some people, and I'll just, I was one of these, and I would struggle with it if it came to pass. But if they said all gun ownership is illegal, you must turn your guns in. Man, Second Amendment says I've got the right. But when I look at where the gospel was born, it was born in a place of weakness amongst a people that were oppressed. And it took over the world not by force of arm, but by force of faith. So it could be that my American values might get in the way of my Christian faith. It doesn't have to have its own way. One of the blessings of my wife is that she has the intestinal fortitude to stand up to me. And it is a blessing. Now, in the moment, I've never thought it was a blessing. But on the backside of it, I have to acknowledge it's a blessing. She occupies a very special place where she can get in my face and say the things to me that I would not allow anybody else to say. And then she says to me, sometimes she says, you're wrong. And I'd love to stand here and tell you that in that moment when she informs me that I'm wrong, and I know she's right that I'm wrong, that I do not seek to assert my own way, but sometimes I do. Because in that moment I know I'm not in a place of love. Now, anywhere between 1 hour and 2 weeks later, I come to her point, and I come to her and I say, what? You're right, I'm wrong. And he said, brother, we don't, no, those take place in the bedroom behind closed doors when I say, you're right, I'm wrong. I don't want the dog to hear it. Unless it's my really old dog and she can't hear, so it's okay for her to be in the room. He said, yeah, I'm making a little bit light, but you know what I'm talking about. You have to be right. It has to be your way. If I don't get my way, then I'm going to take my ball and I'm going to leave. That's not love. That's pride. That's arrogance. That's rebellion. And in marriage and in the church, that's the opposite of where we're supposed to be. Why? Because He says so. And either He's our Lord or He's not. If we had to be honest, and say, Jesus is my Lord, I genuinely want to serve Him the way He wants to be served, or we said, you know what, I'm quitting this thing because I really don't want to do it His way. And if there were no social repercussions and no one would ever say, you know, you need to come back to church, how many of us would leave and never come back? If there were no social whatever attached to it. If we had to admit, do we really want Him to be Lord? Or do we just want to look like we want Him to be Lord? Because in our relationships, love is not touchy, fretful, or resentful. Oh, it's okay to be a little bit agitated when it originally comes. But if you're still there 1 month, 2 months, 6 months, 10 years later, but you've taken communion 500 times with those people, but you've been holding resentment in your heart towards them for the last 10 years, you realize you ate and drank 10 years of condemnation into your soul. Some of you cutting me dagger looks a little bit. That's okay. Are you cutting me dagger looks because it's from love? Or because it's a little bit too close? Love takes no account of the evil done to it. At every point in our lives, we have that wonderful choice. And this last one is why nearly every person that ever has come to me for marital counseling, this one right here, is the one reason why so many went on ahead to divorce. Because there was a wrong, real or perceived, that could not be let go. I've had husbands, I've had wives that some of the wrongs were legit. Some of them, no, it wasn't what they thought. But they could not let it go. But both sides said we're Christian. But they could not and they would not let it go. And that split came. And how often in the church, how often in families, that we find this place, that we will not let it go, whether it's real or perceived. Because love is a choice. It's not an emotion. It's a choice. And that's why verse 13 of chapter 13 reminds us that these three abide. Now, faith, hope, and love, and the greatest of these three is love. And so faith, hope, and love abide. Love, meaning God's true affection, abiding in us, abiding towards our fellow man, growing out of God's love in us. That is the greatest of what remains. It's the foundation for everything. And that's when it's not easy. Do we understand love was never easy? If love was easy, it wouldn't have required Jesus to go to a cross. The cross shows us love was not easy. You and I's peace with God cost God a lot. It cost Jesus his life. You say, well, he came back from it. But oh, what he had to go through to get there. Love, it's not always easy. And there is one great truth about love before we move to the next part. If you bail, and do not make it through on these things, you'll keep going back to this cycle over and over again until you learn to move through it and move past it and grow more as a person. And that is a truth. Because love says to us, forgive, remember no more, and be blessed. Now, the closest slide that there was on the internet was, forgive and forget, not revenge and regret. Forgive. It may be that there was a legitimate wrong done. But as you move past and you come to the place of remember no more. If Tyler does something wrong to me, he knows, I know. But if I forgive, and then I say to him, are you coming over to watch ball this Sunday? When he comes over to watch ball, the topic of conversation is going to be what? Ball. It's not about saying to Tyler, well, you did that wrong to me 3 weeks ago. No. Remember no more. Because the goal of forgiveness is reconciliation. And you say, but what about those of us who've been divorced? Your goal is still reconciliation. If not as husband and wife, as brother and sister. You still have to be able to move forward in Christ as brother and sister. Because sometimes things come to that impasse. But forgiveness is a choice. It is an act of the will. Mark chapter 11. I'm just going to read verses 25 and 26. It says, whenever you stand praying, if you have anything against anyone, forgive him, that your Father in heaven may also forgive you your trespasses. But if you do not forgive, neither will your Father in heaven forgive your trespasses. That's why. It's an issue that separates us from God our Father. It separates us from one another. But when we forgive and we receive forgiveness, then we're blessed in our relationships. We're blessed with our Father. And we're able to keep moving forward. But it is a choice. It is an act of will. It's not an emotion. And I know we know this passage, and I don't want to spend an inordinate amount of time. Matthew 18, beginning at verse 15. Jesus gives them a tough teaching. And he says to him in verse 15, if your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him alone. If he hears you, you've gained your brother. But if he will not hear you, take with you 1 or 2 more, that by the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses every word may be established. And if he refuses to hear them, tell it to the church. And if he refuses even to hear the church, let him be to you like a heathen and a tax collector. Of a truth I say to you, that whatever you bind on earth will be bound in heaven, whatever you loose on earth will be loosed in heaven. Again I say to you, that if 2 of you agree on earth concerning anything that they ask, it will be done for them by my Father in heaven. For where 2 or 3 are gathered together in my name, I am there in the midst of them. So Peter understands this teaching. And now he asks the tough question. Lord, how often shall my brother sin against me and I forgive him? Up to 7 times. This goes all the way back to the Garden of Eden. You remember when Cain killed Abel? And God said, whoever strikes Cain will be avenged 7 times. And then with Lamech, that Lamech said that he had killed a man. And he said, but whoever avenges me, it'll be avenged on them up to 70 times 7, or up to 77 times. Peter's coming back with a righteous perspective that's the opposite of Cain's. If Cain's avenged 7 times, surely I can forgive 7 times. At least that much. And Jesus says to him, I don't say to you up to 7 times, but up to 70 times 7. Therefore the kingdom of heaven is like a certain king who wanted to settle accounts with his servants. And when he had begun to settle up accounts, one was brought to him who owed him 10,000 talents. But as he was not able to pay his master, commanded that he should be sold with his wife and his children and all that he had, and that payment should be made. And the servant therefore fell down before him, saying, Master, have patience with me, and I will pay you all. And the master of that servant was moved with compassion, released him, and forgave him the debt. But that servant went out and found one of his fellow servants who owed him 100 denarii. And he laid hands on him and took him by the throat, saying, Pay me what you owe. So his fellow servant fell down at his feet, and he begged him, saying, Have patience with me, and I'll pay you all. And he wouldn't, but he went and threw him into prison till he should pay the debt. So when his fellow servants saw what had been done, they were very grieved. And he came and he told their master all that had been done. And then the master, after he had called him, said to him, You wicked servant, I forgave you all that debt because you begged me. Should you not have also had compassion on your fellow servant, just as I had pity on you? And his master was angry and delivered him to the torturers till he should pay all that was due to him. So your heavenly Father also will do to you, if each of you from his heart does not forgive his brother his trespasses. You say, that's 15 cents up there. Florida's minimum wage is actually higher than the national minimum wage. It's not as high as some places. Some places are $12 and $15 now for the state minimum wage. I'm not really sure how that's going to work for them, but, you know. But the average of a 2,000 hour a week person, gross, is $17,800. 100 denarii, or 100 days' wages, then would be $1,483. One talent was worth 15 years' wages. Or in comparison, 150,000 years of wages is what this guy owed. In terms of straight dollar amount, it was about $2.7 billion. That's 1.8 million times greater. Or 15 cents compared to 250,000. He said, why do you break it down that small? We may have some closet billionaires in here, but I don't think most of us are closet billionaires. I've only known a few billionaires in my life. I've known a lot of millionaires, but only a few billionaires. He said, what was it like knowing a billionaire? The same as it was knowing anybody else. They didn't say, hi, we're glad to see you. Here's an extra $1 million out of our account. But I did watch a billionaire at a charity dinner. He had already given $1 million to this foundation. And as they're doing their thing, he stands up to the MC and says, can I say something? Crack me up. And the guy was like, yeah, sure. And he's like, I know my wife's probably going to be upset at me, but I just want to give you guys another $1 million tonight because I believe in what you're doing. And, later found out it's worth like, $3.5, $4 billion, But it never worked that way for me, But most of us can understand $250,000. Maybe that's what your house or your land or part of your house and land is worth compared to 15 cents. And this is a tough lesson where forgiveness is concerned. Because if everybody in here owed everybody else 15 cents, we would come to probably owing and expecting that we'd have about $15 due to us. And you might say, well, brother, if 15 cents is all that you got to look forward to, that's it. But the lesson that Jesus is trying to get us to see is, let the 15 cents go. And then stop running up your debt to 15 cents. Because what we owe each other in comparison to what we owe God for His grace, the difference is so phenomenal. You say, but it's my 15 cents. But if you hold on to your 15, you're going to miss out on what He has. That guy, he wanted to hold on to 100 days' wages, and he lost 150,000 years of debt forgiveness. What he was willing to gain in comparison to what he was willing to lose was so small. And at the heart of love and forgiveness, at the heart of love and forgiveness, I say this from my own experience. When Catherine and I were separated, now I'd like to say that I've corrected everything that she was upset about before we separated. I'd like to tell you that. Sometimes I forget, and sometimes she has to remind me that you still need to work on this. But the value of what I did not want to lose was great enough that I didn't necessarily want to hold on to what little bit I could gain. You say, Catherine was worth and is worth more to me as my wife than me necessarily getting my way on everything with her is worth to me. You say that means sometimes you have to be wrong. Sometimes I am wrong, at least 50%. Because the 15 cents it's not worth it. You say, but it's legitimately owed. You're right, it is. But why hold on to it so tight that the only thing you do is cause yourself turmoil and pain and suffering? When over here is waiting 1.8 million times more than that. If you'll just let the 15 cents go, you step into this that is so much greater. Because unforgiveness clogs the pipes. 1 Peter 3:7 reminds husbands and wives that when husbands and wives are at odds with each other, your prayers are hindered. Having a hard time praying for your kids like you need to? Might there be unforgiveness that's hindering you as a husband and wife from being able to pray for your kids or your parents? 1 Peter 3:7 reminds us of that great truth. But it also affects us as Christians. We're not as effective as a church as we could be when we have unforgiveness between us. It hinders our prayers. There's time to forgive. And the time is now. Colossians chapter 3, verses 12 and 13. It says, therefore, as the elect of God, holy and beloved, put on tender mercies, kindness, humility, meekness, long-suffering, bearing with one another and forgiving one another. If anyone has a complaint against another, even as Christ forgave you, so also you must do. Forgive. Unforgiveness is a poison. Unforgiveness is a poison. It'll cause you high blood pressure. It'll cause you ulcers. It'll cause you all kinds of trouble. Sometimes with humans, but always with God and definitely within your own soul. First thing to do is to confess that you've been in a place of unforgiveness. You say, but brother, if I forgive, when I ask my wife for forgiveness, it's because I want the relationship fixed. But also the other side of it is when I ask for forgiveness from her, the other part of it is now it's off of me. If she chooses not to forgive, and just so we're clear, she's always been very gracious and she's forgiven me, then it stays with her. You say, well, you have to repent. Yeah. in forgiving someone else. You say, but they haven't changed anything. Don't let their lack of change keep you from the change that you need. Forgive because it frees you. You say, well, that's kind of selfish. Forgive because it frees you. And because now that you're free and you've forgiven, you know what? It also sets them up in a place to be free if they want to be. And in that regard, what we read in 1 Corinthians 13, it's not selfish for you to forgive because then it frees you. Because the moment it frees you, forgiving them frees them to then make the change that they need to change. And if they change, fantastic. And if they don't, you're not the one carrying it anymore. So if you've been in a place of unforgiveness, confess it, because it says in 1 John that He is faithful and just to cleanse us and to forgive us. Forgive is a will of obedience, not as emotion or feeling. We already read Mark. When you stand praying, forgive, so that your Father can forgive you. It's a choice. Who understands that Christian life is simple, but not easy? You say, but what if it comes back up in my heart again? Then make a confession. Father, I have forgiven that. Devil, get thou behind me. And go forward again. Speak and act in agreement. You say, brother, I can't deal with that person. I get it. You know, someone asked me one time, they said, if the person, if they get to that 490th time, do I still have to forgive them? Yeah. But if you come to the person, if a person comes to your door, and every time they come to your door, they punch you in the nose. But you got a peephole so you can see them. After the third or fourth time, what? Quit opening the door. Open the side window and go, how can I help you? You say, but brother, does that mean, yeah, I've forgiven them. I've forgiven you. My nose is taped up now because you done broke it. I've forgiven you. But I'm not going to open the door 487 more times. And you said, you don't have to necessarily go back into the same situation for the same thing to be done over and over again. But speak and act in agreement. You say you forgive them, move forward in forgiveness. That's what that forgive, remember no more. It's not that you forget. You just don't bring it up again. Because it's about you being blessed and you being right with God. Believe and receive, be clean, remember no more. We're going to sing the song here in just a moment while we pray and while we plead. When was the last time that you and I gave thanks to God and praised God for forgiveness? Not just in the corporate assembly, but privately in our private devotions. Tomorrow is Martin Luther King Day. Never cared much for most of what I had heard of Martin Luther King's speeches. When you hear the same three speeches, after the 40th time you hear them, it's like, yeah, okay. And I was on YouTube one day and I started listening to his other stuff before he became well known when he was just a preacher. And I said, wow, this guy had a lot on the ball. Because his political speeches never impacted me, but his sermons were phenomenal. And in this quote, we must develop and maintain the capacity to forgive. You have to grow it. It doesn't just happen. You have to work on it. You have to increase that capacity. He who is devoid of the power to forgive is devoid of the power to love. There is some good in the worst of us, and there is some evil in the best of us. And when we discover this, we are less prone to hate our enemies. Forgiveness is probably my least favorite sermon. Forgiveness from this perspective, that we have to forgive one another. Oh, I like the sermons where I talk about God forgiving us. But what I've received is what I'm supposed to give. What you've received is what you're supposed to give. The question is, will you forgive me? That was our question to Jesus. Will you forgive me, Jesus? Will you forgive one another? Of the many things that most churches need is for people to forgive each other. Going back to your question, Rich. How many people in how many congregations are holding on to stuff from 20 years ago? Some people might be holding on to stuff from 20 minutes ago. But what? Forgive. Some of y'all have heard about when we were in North Arkansas. You literally could walk from the front door of one congregation, throw a baseball, and hit the other congregation. The church buildings were that close. They split back in the 50s. And when we tried to get them together, it was $125 to a charity that separated the two churches. And a sister in the congregation I served, she said, I will write the check. She said, I'll even set up an account for it to be automatically drafted if they're willing to come back together. And there were people that said to me, as long as so-and-so or any of his family are alive, I will not darken it, I will not forgive it. And there were people in those two churches that died that said, until the day I die, I will never forgive so-and-so in that other church. And it was one dude that held up the two churches coming back together. And there's still two churches, and they're both still medium-sized. The two of them together make them one of the largest churches in the entire county. But because they can't bridge the space of a baseball throw and $125, they're still separate. Today, we all need is forgiveness. Today, you need to extend forgiveness. If you do, will you come while we stand, while we stand?